Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this webinar on managing workplace conflict in these challenging times. In today's presentation, we'll cover key considerations that all employers should be aware of when approaching different types of conflict that can happen in the workplace. Throughout this webinar, we're going to provide you with valuable information and solutions for recognizing and understanding how conflict develops, as well as discuss how and when to get involved and options for conflict resolution. My name is Melissa Voigt, and I will be your presenter today. As an HR Downloads researcher and writer, I have extensive experience in developing our policies, training, and other resources for our clients. And today's webinar, we're going to focus on providing tips to ensure that you can confidently address workplace conflict. So we're going to discuss how to identify the main sources of conflict in the workplace, recognize the early signs of conflict and understand how that conflict escalates, understand the responsibilities and the role of leadership when addressing conflict, and use different approaches to help resolve workplace conflict. For our attendees, if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to ask them in the question and answer box to the right of your screen. If we do have a few minutes at the end, we might be able to take a couple questions for a brief Q&A session. So HR Downloads, we believe that having an actionable plan to implement new concepts is just as important as the knowledge itself. So to help you manage conflict in the workplace, we're offering a checklist on managing workplace conflict to all registrants that addresses some of the issues that we'll be talking about in today's webinar. So we all know the pandemic has been tough on everyone. While the sentiment should be that we're all in this together, employees are spending more time than ever managing workplace conflict that's arising from the pandemic. The constantly changing guidelines for individuals and businesses have forced us to change the way that we work and how we live quickly. And everyone has their own way of adjusting to those changes, which is resulting in a new set of challenges. So we're here to help you understand how these new challenges not only fuel conflict, but affect how individuals respond to conflict. We'll uncover potential sources of conflict and address conflict, bearing in mind that each situation is unique and there is no single approach that works for all. So first, let's discuss why it's important to address conflict and what causes conflict in workplaces. Working and interacting with others will always lead to some degree of conflict. We all have our own wants and needs and strong opinions and views on how things should be done. We all want our ideas to be heard and to be valuable. And we all perform our job duties just a little bit different than the next person, and sometimes even wonder why our coworkers do things a certain way. These small conflicts can create moments of friction that can happen on any given day, but we typically don't see them as a major issue. However, there is a difference between conflict that helps us make better decisions and sparks creativity or engages a healthy debate, and conflict that becomes unproductive and negatively affects the work environment. When unresolved, workplace conflict can escalate quickly. It can increase stress, it can affect our productivity, and it can also create a toxic or hostile work environment that can have damage to personal and work relationships and also have a serious impact on mental health and well-being. Conflict can also be harmful to the business when it begins to affect productivity, business goals, or the customer experience. Organizations have quickly and frequently adapted their operations and work-related processes to meet constantly changing government guidelines while trying to safely carry out their business functions. These changes have transformed the workplace, but they're not without their own challenges. So this current environment is not brand new. We've been in the pandemic for a year now, but as the situation progresses, everything is a constant change, and it continues to affect all of us differently. The worry over the health of our loved ones and ourselves, our jobs, finances, and just overall uncertainty related to COVID-19 in general has taken its toll even when we try to be our best selves. And these days, it's not easy for us to just leave our problems at the door when we're going into or logging into work for the day. Our interactions and how we interact and understand others have changed. We've had to adapt and learn new ways of communication, resulting in misinterpreted communication, unclear expectations, as well as an increase in workplace conflict. So leaders may notice that their employees are becoming easily stressed or agitated if they're not able to adapt to these changes, meanwhile becoming frustrated themselves when employees aren't able to adapt or fail to follow the new guidelines. One of the most problematic sources of conflict, though, occurs when employers are not doing enough to address or respond to employees' concerns or challenges that they're facing as a result of the pandemic. So identifying the type of conflict likely to occur and the sources of that conflict will help employers and employees alike be better prepared to handle the change and stress that comes along with it. Well, remote work, as we know, has become a new challenge to some people. So this is something that's easily fueling workplace conflict. Communication is easily misinterpreted through digital communication. Many face-to-face interactions have been replaced with email, video calls, and instant messaging. The lack of interaction can cause individuals to read into something wrong or interpreting a different meaning than what the sender intended. Remote work also limits opportunities for informal social interactions that we would have had in the workplace and would typically help us with getting to know our coworkers and just have a better understanding of their communication styles. At what point in time, flexible scheduling and remote work was all the rage, but it hasn't worked out for everyone. People are becoming a bit more agitated in general due to being in close quarters or working long-term with a spouse, a roommate, or children in the home with having no space or time to themselves, or separation that they would typically have when they were going into the workplace for the day. And employers might face challenges with adjusting to their employees adapting to new technology or having issues with the remote work setup in general, whether it be their equipment, their connection, or their work environment. So this can also lead to increased frustration in general, but they're more likely to have conflict with their management because these things aren't working how they should be. Isolation has increased depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues, and people might feel that they're alone and have difficulty reaching out and communicating with others. And then they may also develop feelings of just being closed off from others, which can turn any given interaction into conflict. And then employees can also become out of sight, out of mind, which becomes a real risk when conflict goes unnoticed or avoided and gets to the point where it becomes unmanageable. So for those who still report to the workplace every day, they're also experiencing increased conflict. So in the workplace, there can be conflict over things like health and safety issues. So new stress related to constantly adjusting to new COVID-19 rules and guidelines can definitely take its toll. And there may also be conflict when it comes to requirements to follow protocols that some might not agree with or refuse to follow. So there's been also an increase in tension between individuals when one person isn't properly following workplace health and safety guidelines, such as anger over the correct use or not using face coverings or masks, or upset when people aren't following the 6-foot social distancing guidelines or even directional paths or arrows placed throughout the workplace. And then conflict can also cause from anger of having to go into work while others are still able to work at home, or some people are still off of work, or just the transition from having to work remotely, going back to in-person duties can also cause a little bit of frustration. And then we're also looking at interactions, escalations, and confrontations with the public for those working in essential or public-facing roles. These are likely to occur more frequently as well. And on top of this, we must also consider conflict over personal viewpoints on everything from current social and political climates to current lockdown measures and restrictions in place, and how those viewpoints affect our interactions with others. So disagreements that happen in the workplace can either be described or categorized as interpersonal or task conflict. So interpersonal conflict is the most obvious because this type of conflict also stems from personal clashes, such as difference in personalities, a breakdown in communication, or a difference in personal values. This is something that can negatively affect productivity and create a toxic work environment, as well as lead to animosity between coworkers due to different viewpoints. So interpersonal conflicts include relationship conflicts, such as personal conflicts and disagreements that might be related or completely unrelated to work, but they still affect the workplace. Or status conflicts, such as disagreements over who is in charge and conflict over who has more influence or more power or seniority over another situation or person. Now, task conflict, on the other hand, is a difference of opinion over job functions or related tasks. And this occurs when a disagreement or argument interferes with or prevents the completion of a workplace task or the achievement of a goal. These conflicts can be caused by personality differences, but task conflict related is mostly due to a result of differing approaches to work processes and procedures. So this is going to include disagreements over what should be done and how work should be done. So organizations where different roles or teams are working on the same project or depending on somebody else to complete a portion of the work are most likely to experience task-related conflict, as there's a tendency of placing blame on someone else for dropping the ball or holding up the process or not pulling their own weight or doing their job correctly. And this causes repercussions for everyone else. As more and more workplaces become collaborative, task conflict will only begin to increase. So not all conflict is bad. As the workforce becomes more diverse, our differences from one another can lead to an increase in workplace conflicts, but it's not all negative. The same diversity can provide ideas and insight from a wide variety of backgrounds and work experiences. And when handled right, conflict can also result in a positive outcome, helping you achieve different or better results when input suggests different ways to improve things, increase job satisfaction when employees are able to collaborate to achieve a goal, and it can improve communication and strengthen working and personal relationships between employees. So we're just going to check out a few factors that are affecting conflict. So in addition to the pandemic, an organization's corporate culture significantly affects the types and sources of workplace conflict. Understanding factors that spark conflict can help you identify the sources that are most likely to be at risk for developing into future conflict. So some of the most common sources of workplace conflict stem from poor communication, whether the message wasn't effectively relayed or the message was misinterpreted by the recipient, ambiguous rules, unclear expectations, or lack of clarity on what or how something should be done between both employees and leadership. Poor management. So this includes micromanagement, unrealistic demands, employees' needs that are unmet, abuse of power, or biased and unfair treatment. Limited or improper resources to do a job. So this can be equipment related, hardware, software, applications, tools, or even training. Personality clashes, so different in values or interests, and different work styles, which includes poor and unequal in performance among peers, competition, or power struggles. So one employee might believe that somebody else is not pulling their weight, as we mentioned earlier, or that they're doing more work than somebody else on their team. Now, different roles have different responsibilities, and while everyone in the organization should be working towards achieving the same goals for the company, the dynamics between those different roles within an organization can also lead to conflict when two parties are not aligned on the same work-related task or objective. So conflicts can happen between employees. So employee to employee conflicts can happen when two or more employees who do the same job or are on the same level of employment, such as status or seniority, have a conflict over how work gets done, who gets credit for what, or one person doing more or less work than the other. Employee and manager conflicts can happen when an employee is unhappy with their job duties or tasks, and they have a negative reaction to change. They believe that they're being treated less fairly than others or are being deliberately insubordinate. And then if we flip it around, manager and employee conflict can happen when a manager treats one employee differently than another or dictates over an employee where it becomes a win or lose power struggle or sees their employees as adversaries and not partners. And then we also have conflict between other team members. So this includes people that are in different roles or different departments. And this is likely to occur if there are different management styles, or maybe one department has more responsibility than another, or if an essential task or function cannot be completed without the other party first doing their part. All right, so now that we understand how conflict happens, we're going to take a little bit of a look on how conflict escalates and how individuals respond to conflict. So first, we'll get started on recognizing the early signs of conflict. Once there's an inkling of conflict, if not addressed, it does have the potential to continue to escalate to the point where it's unmanageable. So in this diagram, we're looking at a model that comes from the Danish Center for Conflict Resolution, and this is their conflict escalation model. So it kind of describes how it starts and the potential to how far conflict can actually escalate. So at the bottom, it starts with a simple disagreement. This is where each party sees things a little bit differently and wants a different outcome. But if it's not addressed at this level, the next step that happens is personification. So this is where employees begin pointing the you finger at others and placing blame on someone else for either an issue not getting resolved or a job not getting done or it's somebody else's fault. And then as we move up the steps, the problem expands when other issues get added to the existing problem. So this could be something like, oh, this always happens, or last time we had this problem, something like that, where they're adding other topics into the pile that are not relevant to that exact specific situation of conflict. But then there comes a point where dialogue is abandoned altogether, and then the belief that any further communication is completely useless. So you may hear things such as, why bother talking about it? Nothing's going to get fixed, or I can't work with this person. There's no point. We're not moving forward on anything. And then once that communication stops, the other party may begin to be viewed as the enemy. So it turns into this person always, or even employees will start getting others to have the same views as them on that person. And as soon as the enemy is established, people will begin to show open hostility and aggression and believe that their actions are justifiable. So if they're acting a certain way, they will believe that that's okay because this person had caused this or this person made them feel this way. And then the final step in the escalation process is polarization. So the conflict has not been addressed or resolved, but is completely abandoned altogether. So people may completely stop communicating or trying to address the situation or cut ties with that other person. And this can become problematic, especially if people are supposed to interact and work together. So when conflict does arise, there are a few different ways that we can respond to it. According to the International Center for Cooperation and Conflict Resolution, how we approach conflict, so anytime that there's a situation that could be perceived as conflict, the outcome is based on our feelings towards our involvement with the conflict. So this is how we want to be involved. How do we feel about when there is a situation of conflict? How does that make us feel? These feelings could be of helplessness, lack of control, aggression from us or from others, or just overall concern about what the conflict brings. So these emotions we have involved in that conflict will trigger a response in either one direction or another. So in this chart, you might look at it and it doesn't have to be one single response. It can be one or the other, but it'll generally take a side from either the right or the left. So actively avoiding conflict, where you do all that you can to make sure that you're not involved, or somebody may intentionally seek involvement. Soft or assertive, or hard, dominating, and aggressive. So this would be how you respond to it. Are you one that goes forward and has to make your point, or are you kind of laid back and not so serious when a situation does come up? And then having a rigid agenda and a set of rules to follow, or loose, informal, and improvised. So some people like to address a very specific way, have a structured conversation where, hey, we say this is our issue, what do we need to do about it? And some people may be informal, where they just kind of touch on it as it happens and have a loose, informal discussion. Over rationalizing with intellect, or high emotional reactions based on feelings. So as somebody might pick apart and try to say this happened because of this, or I feel this way because of this, and take an approach to it where they've thought about everything and why it happens. Where on the other hand, somebody may have an emotional reaction and just kind of on the spot respond, actively trying to escalate or to minimize conflict. So this kind of goes with the first point, where somebody's either actively avoiding or intentionally seeking. So in this case, if there are people that do enjoy or like to get involved with conflict, sometimes they will try to escalate the situation to make it keep going or to make it worse, or there will be the people that try to minimize the situation, and then compulsively revealing everything and anything, or concealing as much as possible. So this can happen when trying to come up with a resolution, or if employees are working with managers to seek out assistance, or somebody else is involved, where they spill out every last little detail about how they feel, what had happened. Or you will have those people that do not talk at all and will not open up. Now, in these unprecedented times, it helps to have an idea on how individuals are likely to respond to conflict based on the levels of stress and anxiety that they're currently experiencing. So when we're feeling like ourselves and we're in a good place, we're more resilient and are able to manage our emotions and how we react to conflict. However, when we're put under stress, we're less likely to be able to reasonably handle and resolve conflict on our own. So emotional reactions are on the rise. Previously normal situations that wouldn't have been a big deal, they're now triggering to us. So problems are now becoming personal, where a normal workplace conflict is now interpreted as a personal attack. And the response is a reaction that's based on emotion rather than rational thinking. People are having a tough time, tougher than ever these days, and facing conflict and knowing how to respond and resolve them isn't really easy to do when we're under stress. So there comes a point where leadership must know when to intervene. Managers may find that pre-COVID times that in those pre-COVID times that much of their days were already spent attempting to resolve workplace conflict. Because of the circumstances of the pandemic, though, you may find yourself avoiding dealing with minor situations that take up too much time. But as we mentioned earlier, minor conflict, especially now, has the potential to escalate out of control. So at what point does leadership need to step in? Knowing when to get involved and intervene can help prevent conflict from escalating into more serious issues. The best approach to conflict is to tackle it immediately before it does escalate or becomes personal. And most importantly, employers should first address any mental or physical health related issues stemming from conflict and ensure that they're providing and fostering a safe work environment. So when do you step in? Managers should step in and address conflict when personal issues begin spilling into the workplace, performance or work becomes affected, employees become intentionally insubordinate, employees are not able to resolve a conflict on their own, when the work environment becomes toxic or hostile, or if any employee begins feeling threatened, intimidated, abused, or harassed, and if the employee is experiencing any sort of mental health concerns. Now, this list is not exclusive, but these are some of the situations where managers definitely need to take action and step in. So now that we've seen how conflict escalates and the different responses to conflict, let us walk you through some of the different approaches to conflict resolution. When it comes to helping with conflict, someone might reach out for help to resolve an issue, but in other cases, you might observe a situation, an interaction, or behavior and choose to approach the individuals involved directly. Addressing conflict with employees can be challenging and uncomfortable, but having difficult conversations is part of the leadership role, and you must be proactive when it comes to uncovering conflict among employees. If an employee is not willing to or able to resolve their own conflict, or it is escalated into some more serious issues, as we mentioned earlier, you will have to be the one to initiate the conversation. So HR Downloads does offer training on handling difficult employee conversations, and this can help you confidently have these types of discussions professionally and effectively. You should also start with a simple check-in just to see how employees are doing. This is something, especially during the pandemic, that employers should have been doing overall, just to touch base with their employees, to catch up on work-related tasks, but also to check on their well-being. So if you're already doing regular check-ins, try to organically fit the conversation into that meeting. Otherwise, just consider setting up a check-in meeting where you can find out how they're doing, but also address the elephant in the room or the conversation that maybe they don't want to have. If the conflict has been brought forward to you by someone else or is something that you've noticed on your own, just ask what's going on. This doesn't have to be an awkward conversation. Just seek out some feedback on concerns or issues that they're having. And if there's anything that they want to discuss with you, what they would like from you, or if there's anything else that you can do to help them out in general. But understand that not everyone will be open to bringing up their issues. So at this point, you have to be straightforward, let them know that there's an issue, that you notice that there's an issue, Then express your concern for either their mental health, their performance, their relationship with coworkers, or whatever else might be suffering due to the conflict. And then make sure that you're also being sensitive to their situation, but that you're also fair and understanding that there is another side to the story. When it comes to getting both perspectives, talk to each person separately before talking them together. This will help you see both perspectives and they can have a discussion with you without feeling attacked by the other party. If you need to dig a little deeper to find out where the conflict stemmed from, these tips, there's a TED Talks, it's from the Ted Baylor School, just talked about helping to gain a little bit more insight and identifying the root cause. So the first thing is to consider if the main source of conflict is from a single person versus a structural issue. So recognizing where the conflict is either stemming from a toxic employee or the workplace. And if it is a toxic employee, that those employees can cause a chain that negatively affects everybody. Then it's asking the right people the right questions. So our first instinct when there is a problem is to go straight to the top to get information. So if there's a performance issue or if there's a problem between employees, we'll tend to reach out to a manager and ask, what's going on? Why is this happening? But we need to get perspectives on the challenges of work from employees at all levels. Is there something that would help you do your job a little bit better? Or is there something that bothers you anytime that this is said or done? So questions like that will help you get a little bit more feedback and understand maybe just different factors that might be causing the employees to experience conflict in the workplace. And then you want to make sure that everyone is aligned. So this includes providing clarity on expectations, including who makes decisions and who's expected to do what in their roles. You also want to build an allyship with people at all levels of the organization so they can help you support and implement any necessary changes that can mitigate conflict. So this is getting, as we mentioned, the employee feedback, but also taking into consideration suggestions for improvement. And then when you do make changes or roll out policies, you want to make sure that you're able to gain buy-in from everybody at every level. And then finally, you want to teach new habits for maintaining differences. So offer the tools that employees need to learn how to work through differences. So things such as effective communication training, as well as any other resources for dealing with work-related stress, anxiety, emotional stress, or even working with people of different cultures and different backgrounds. Now, early intervention is critical for effective conflict resolution. When conflict happens, you can choose to avoid the problem or confront the issue head on. Many people will altogether try to avoid conflict because it's an uncomfortable situation, but avoidance is not a productive way to solve the issue at hand. It doesn't make the problem go away, and it's likely to just increase tension and further communication failures. Dealing with conflict when it occurs can help everyone involved learn to work together and collaborate to share thoughts and ideas for coming up with a positive resolution. When it comes to approaching conflict between employees, let the dust settle and avoid trying to come up with a solution when emotions or tensions are running high to ensure that discussions are respectful and constructive. Now, each situation is different, and there are many ways to approach conflict resolution, including forcing an outcome, conceding, or finding compromise. Now, these approaches are identified under the ThomasKilmann conflict model. The ThomasKilmann conflict model instrument is a conflict analysis model that suggests our conflict response behavior is a result of personal predispositions and requirements for handling specific situations that we might find ourselves in. Now, under this model, there are 5 possible outcomes for resolving conflict. So approaches to each resolution will fall in between a range of cooperative and assertive behaviors. In an assertive response, the goal of the individual involved is to satisfy their own concerns, where in a cooperative response, the person will attempt to satisfy the concerns of someone else before themselves. These two behavior dimensions will define the primary 5 modes for responding to conflict. So the first one is competing, and competing is considered a power-oriented, assertive, and uncooperative outcome. An individual will do whatever it takes to address their own concerns and win at the expense of others. Now, accommodating is at the complete opposite end of the spectrum, and accommodating is unassertive, but it's also a cooperative outcome. Unlike competing, individuals who accommodate are in self-sacrifice mode, and they'll do whatever it takes to satisfy another person, even if it's neglecting their own concerns. Now we'll move to avoiding. So avoiding is both unassertive and it's uncooperative. The issue is pretty much sidestepped or ignored, and the individual doesn't really address anyone's concerns. They just withdraw and avoid it. And then we'll move on to the other side towards increasingly cooperative. So collaboration is an assertive and cooperative way of resolving and involves working with others to find some solution that fully satisfies their concerns. It means digging into an issue to pinpoint the underlying needs and wants of two individuals. And then finally, we have compromising. So compromising is moderately assertive and cooperative, and it results in both parties coming to a mutually acceptable solution where everyone is partially or fully satisfied. It can mean coming to a mutual agreement or working together to come up with a brand new solution rather than taking side A or side B. Now, we don't exclusively stick to one particular style of dealing with conflict. We're capable of using all 5 modes to conflict response. However, some work better than others, and we'll typically tend to use these modes a certain way. Like if there's one that we fall under, we'll tend to always go that way anytime that we're in the conflict resolution steps. So finally, let's discuss and expand on the steps included in the conflict resolution process. The first step in the conflict resolution process is to ask questions to clarify that there is a disagreement and gain a greater understanding of what the conflict is about. Questions help you gain more information and demonstrate an interest in learning the other person's perspective, as well as encouraging the discussion towards progress. Questions should be open-ended and require the person to offer more information with their response, which can help any of the individuals involved come up with an agreeable solution. More clarification may be necessary, so asking for specific examples to situations, just so you're aware of the true source of the conflict. Now, the next step is establishing common goals. So conflict occurs when a barrier prevents people from achieving goals or understanding communication. Work with both parties to establish meaningful, obtainable goals. A common goal can be a resolution that best meets the needs and the wants of each individual. Without a common goal, it's easy to fall into one-sided thinking where you're always biased and you believe that you're in the right and the other person is wrong. So conflicts are more difficult to resolve when each side is focused on being the winner or the other one is right. Resolving conflict isn't about winning at the expense of someone else losing. By clarifying the disagreement through asking questions and actively listening to the other person's point of view, you're likely to be able to identify some common ground. Once you've clarified the disagreement and established common goals, it's time to determine the barriers that prevent you from achieving your goal. Often, these barriers are specific to the situation. So barriers that can hinder the conflict resolution process include miscommunication. So failing to listen or ask questions or not understanding the other person's point of view. Mistrust, so lacking faith in the ability to be able to resolve conflict or have somebody help you resolve conflict effectively. Minimizing concerns. So this happens when somebody acts as though another person's concern is insignificant or unimportant or not as valid as their own. Poor planning. So failing to anticipate another person's response to potential conflicts. And then disrespect. So failing to treat the other person with respect, even if we're stressed out or if we're in the heat of the moment. So one or more of these barriers could be creating an impasse in workplace conflicts. The final step and end goal of the conflict resolution process is to have both parties agree on a suitable resolution. Once you've identified the source of the disagreement, establish mutually agreed upon goals, and recognize any barriers holding you back from resolution, come up with a resolution based on negotiation and compromise. This should be much easier to do. Consider a resolution that both parties are satisfied with the outcome, even if it wasn't the individual outcome that each person wanted for themselves coming into it. Remember, a resolution may involve some negotiation and compromise, and that doesn't mean that there's going to be a winner or a loser. Once a mutually agreed upon conflict resolution is in place, each party has a responsibility to uphold their end of the agreement. The role each employee plays in maintaining the resolution should be discussed and outlined in some sort of policy. So if you have a conflict resolution policy, even if the solution satisfies both parties. So now we'll just touch on a few best practices for conflict resolution. So employee recommendations for resolving workplace conflicts can include addressing the conflict early. Be direct. Don't assume that the other party even knows that there's an issue. Focus on the challenge. Make sure that the resolution process is revolved around solving the issue and is not about personal issues with the other person. Be prepared to bring forward suggestions for resolutions and solutions, but also make sure that they're willing to compromise on another solution. And be respectful, even if the other person isn't. Our recommendations for employers include have clear policies and procedures for approaching conflict, handling escalations, and the conflict resolution process. Provide guidelines on respectful and acceptable behavior, such as a code of conduct, and include an open door policy so employees will feel comfortable, safe, and respected when coming to you. Treat all employees respectfully and be consistent. Treating one person differently than another can open up potential for discrimination claims. Provide training on effective communication and conflict resolution. Understand and seek out organizational factors that are a source of conflict. Look at processes, systems, operations, leadership for any risk and make any necessary changes. You also want to make sure it's not a you versus them situation. Work with, not against the employees to help them achieve their goals. And finally, avoid punishment. Employees who are punished for disagreement are less likely to bring up problems in the future, and this will let them build up and it can turn into a potential blowout. Before we conclude today's webinar, let's just review some of the main takeaways. The current situation with the pandemic has created more stress and tension, and now conflicts in the workplace are on the rise. Understanding various workplace factors and dynamics can help you better identify the source of workplace conflict. Leadership must know when to intervene and how to address conflict. And each situation is unique and may require a different approach to reach a resolution. The topics that we covered in today's webinar can also be supported with HR download services. Recommendations for services based on what we talked about today include our HR fundamentals. HR Downloads has Canada's leading library of HR policies, forms, letters, and job descriptions. With thousands of customizable documents, we're sure to have what you need. This includes a global code of conduct, a conflict resolution policy, a mutual respect policy, and HR Downloads Guide to Conflict Resolution. To support you with the items covered in today's webinar, HR Fundamentals also includes access to our in-depth Compliance Center tool, a monthly newsletter to the world of Canadian HR news and legislation, and unlimited support from our client success team. We also have live HR advice. Managing workplace conflict is an important part of your role, and the intricacies of it can be challenging. We have a dedicated team of senior HR advisors available to guide you through any stages of the employee lifecycle. Our live HR advice service offers unlimited phone support in English and French that is tailored to your unique work environment. If you're ever in doubt, give us a call. And finally, HR Complete. Discover complete solutions for your organization through our HR Complete membership. Using HR Complete, you have endless resources available to you with live HR advice, online training, policies, surveys, and more. Our team and our technology can all work together to find customized solutions that suit your organization's specific needs. So we're here to help. So we'll now just take a couple minutes to answer some of your questions about workplace conflict. So one question asks, what if a conflict between employees cannot be resolved? So this is really going to depend on what you and the employees are looking to achieve out of the resolution. Not every single conflict will be able to be resolved, and not every single employee will be satisfied with the outcome of the resolution for the ones that we would consider are resolved. There's always going to be differences, but even if employees are not able to come to a mutual agreement, their interactions must be respectful and work must continue. So take a look at the situation and see what it affects. If the conflict is creating a toxic environment or having a negative impact on productivity, if not, they may be able to continue to carry out their work and interact with one another amicably. However, if it continues to escalate, becomes hostile, or work is not getting done, it will be necessary to have another discussion where you set expectations for what the organization or what you consider acceptable behavior and performance. And then, if necessary, you'll want to move towards steps for progressive discipline that are going to align with your company's values, whatever performance management processes that you have in place, and of course the company's code of conduct, which should address behavior expectations. Now it looks like we've reached time, so I'm now going to conclude today's presentation. As we mentioned earlier, you will receive a checklist over some of the topics that we talked about today and a replay of this webinar within the next week through the email that you used to register. On a final note, I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today. We hope to see you back for our next webinar. Stay tuned into HR Downloads on social media for the next webinar announcement, and subscribe to our blog where we frequently post items related to our webinars and even include more content. Thanks again and have a great day. Bye.